Christmas Eve, 2024. The Victorian mansion glowed like a Hallmark card, twinkling lights, roaring fire, the scent of pine and betrayal thick in the air. I'm Sarah, 42, widowed 3 years after my husband David's accident. My 8-year-old Emily clutched my hand, eyes sparkling at the mountain of gifts under the tree. My niece Chloe, golden child of my perfect sister Linda, ripped open a sleek black box. An iPhone 17, she shrieked. Grandma Eleanor beamed, snapping photos. Then Emily's turn, a tiny, crumpled package. Inside, a $5 plastic bracelet, beads already falling off. Emily's smile never wavered. "Thank you, Grandma," she chirped. Eleanor's eyes flicked to me, cold as the snow outside. "It's age-appropriate," she said. Then leaning to Linda, "She's not as special as Chloe. Never was." My blood turned to ice. That whisper sliced deeper than any knife. But Emily? She just hugged the bracelet to her chest like treasure. Later, as the family toasted with crystal flutes, Emily tugged my sleeve. "Mommy, can we give Grandma our special gift now? The one we'd made in secret layers of paper, a child's drawing and something hidden inside that would make my father drop to his knees sobbing. What have we done? What was in that box? How did a little girl's crayon marks expose forged signatures, insurance fraud, and a death that was no accident? Stick with me. 6 shocking twists. 1 burned inheritance and a Christmas redemption that'll leave you cheering. You won't believe how far I went to turn a $5 insult into a legacy worth millions. Keep watching. The real gift is just beginning. My name is Sarah Bennett, 42 years old, a 2nd grade teacher in a small Ohio town, and a widow for the last 3 Christmases. David died in a single-car crash on a dry road, leaving me and our daughter Emily to stitch a life from the scraps of what had been. I still wake some nights reaching for the empty side of the bed, but Emily's soft breathing down the hall keeps me anchored. This year, like every year since the funeral, we packed the old Subaru and drove the hour and a half to my parents' Victorian on Maple Hill, the house where I grew up believing love was measured in square footage and silver polish. Snow started falling the moment we turned onto the long, curving drive. Fat flakes that caught in Emily's eyelashes and made her laugh the way only 8-year-olds can, pure and uncomplicated. The porch light spilled gold across the wraparound veranda, and the wreath on the door smelled of fresh pine and cinnamon sticks. I carried our overnight bags while Emily skipped ahead, boots crunching, clutching the handmade card she had colored for weeks. "Grandma's going to love the glitter snowflakes," she told me, breath fogging the air. I believed her. Children believe in magic. Mothers believe in children. Inside the house was exactly as memory demanded. 12-foot Fraser fir in the front parlor. Crystal icicles catching the firelight, the grandfather clock ticking like a patient heartbeat. My mother Eleanor met us in the foyer wearing the same burgundy velvet dress she wore every Christmas Eve, pearls glowing against her collarbones. She kissed the air beside my cheek. "Sarah, darling, you look thin. Teaching must be draining." Her gaze slid to Emily, softened a fraction. "And look at our little artist." Emily beamed and offered the card. Eleanor took it with 2 fingers as though glitter might stain. Dad emerged from the study, pipe smoke curling behind him like a friendly ghost. He ruffled Emily's curls, called her Captain, the nickname he'd given her the first time she'd saluted him with a candy cane. Linda arrived minutes later, sweeping in with Chloe, both of them flushed from the cold, and the triumph of being fashionably late. Chloe wore a white coat with a fur-trimmed hood, the kind of coat that costs more than my monthly mortgage. She hugged Emily quickly, then darted to the tree, eyes wide at the mountain of presents. We gathered in the parlor the way we always had, adults on the brocade sofa, children cross-legged on the Persian rug. Dad played Santa, handing out gifts with theatrical flair. Chloe received a designer backpack, a set of pearl earrings for when she's older, Eleanor said, and then the box that made the room tilt. Sleek black embossed apple, the newest iPhone 17. Chloe squealed a sound sharp enough to cut glass. She hugged Eleanor so hard the pearls rattled. Linda snapped photos, tears of pride shining. Say thank you to Grandma Darling. Chloe did, voice syrupy, already scrolling. Emily waited patiently, knees tucked under her red velvet dress, the one I'd found on sale at Macy's. When Dad handed her a small, lumpy package wrapped in last year's paper, she smiled the way she smiles at every gift, as if the wrapping itself were the present. She peeled the tape carefully, saving the bow. Inside lay a plastic bracelet, 5 multicolored beads on an elastic string, the kind you fish out of a dollar store bin. One bead was already loose, rolling across the rug like a runaway marble. Emily's fingers closed around it. "It's so pretty," she whispered, eyes shining with the same gratitude she'd shown for the hand-me-down mittens last year. Eleanor's smile didn't falter, but her eyes flicked to me a quick surgical assessment. "Something simple for a simple girl," she said, loud enough for the room. Linda laughed, a tinkling sound that matched her earrings. Chloe glanced up from her phone long enough to smirk, then returned to her screen. Dad cleared his throat, reached for another gift, but the moment had calcified. I felt it in my chest, a cold weight settling where warmth had been. Emily slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, the elastic snapping against her skin. She held it to the firelight, admiring the way the plastic caught the glow. "Look, Mommy, it's like a rainbow." I nodded, throat tight. Eleanor turned to Linda, voice low but not low enough. "She's not really one of us anymore, is she? Not since she married that man." The words landed between us like frostbite. Linda's reply was lost under the crackle of the fire, but her nod was unmistakable. I stood to help Dad with the cocoa, needing distance, needing air. In the hallway, the grandfather clock struck 7. Emily's laughter floated behind me, bright and unbroken. She hadn't heard. Children hear what they want to hear. I passed the kitchen doorway and paused. Eleanor's voice again, softer now, conspiratorial. "The girl will be fine. Chloe's the one with potential." Linda murmured agreement. I pressed my back to the wall, heart hammering against my ribs. Potential. As if love were a stock portfolio. When I returned, Emily was showing Chloe how the bracelet stretched. Chloe wrinkled her nose. "It's kind of babyish," she said, not unkindly, just honestly. Emily's smile dimmed for the first time all evening. She looked at me uncertain. I forced my own smile, the one I'd perfected in parent-teacher conferences when a child's drawing was called abstract instead of beautiful. "It's perfect," I told her. "Rainbows are for everyone." Later, after the dishes were done and the adults lingered over brandy, Emily fell asleep on the window seat, bracelet still on her wrist, moonlight turning the cheap beads into tiny moons. I covered her with the afghan my grandmother had knitted. Eleanor watched from the doorway, expression unreadable. "She'll outgrow it," she said. I wasn't sure if she meant the bracelet or Emily herself. Dad retreated to his study, the door closing with a soft click. Linda and Chloe left for the guest cottage, phone glowing in Chloe's hand like a talisman. The house settled into its nighttime creaks. I stood in the parlor, staring at the tree. One ornament caught my eye. A delicate glass sphere David and I had bought on our honeymoon in Venice. It hung lower than the others, as if bowing under invisible weight. Emily stirred, murmuring in her sleep. I knelt beside her, brushing curls from her forehead. The bracelet had slipped down to her elbow, the loose bead finally fallen. It lay on the cushion like a discarded tear. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers. $5. That was the price of my daughter's worth in my mother's eyes. I tucked the bead into my pocket, a tiny, hard promise. Outside, snow kept falling, erasing footprints covering the world in hush. Inside, something shifted, quiet as a heartbeat. I looked at Emily's sleeping face, innocent, trusting, and felt the first stirrings of a plan. Not loud, not yet, but steady. But the moment I saw what was inside that tiny box, I stopped breathing. The breath I had been holding slipped out in a slow, trembling ribbon as Emily's fingers closed around the plastic beads. She held the bracelet up to the firelight, tilting her wrist so the colors flashed like cheap carnival glass. "Mommy, look, it's stretchy," she said, voice bright with wonder. I managed a nod, but the room had tilted the walls, pressing closer, the scent of cinnamon suddenly cloying. Eleanor turned away to refill her sherry, the crystal decanter catching the flames in a way that made her diamonds look like drops of frozen blood. I busied myself gathering the torn wrapping paper, folding it into neat squares the way my mother had taught me decades ago. The ritual steadied my hands, if not my heart. Emily scampered to the mirror over the mantel, admiring her new treasure. Chloe, already bored with her phone, glanced over. "That's my old one," she announced, matter-of-fact thumbs still scrolling. "I wore it when I was like 6. The words landed softly, but they struck me like thrown gravel. Emily's reflection faltered for a heartbeat, then she smiled wider, as if the bracelet had just gained value by association. Eleanor returned, noticing the exchange. She set her glass down with a delicate clink. "Oh, darling, it's sentimental," she said, reaching for Chloe's wrist to display an identical band. Only this one gleamed with real pearls and a tiny engraved tag. "See, I had it cleaned and polished for Emily. A family tradition." The lie slid out smooth as silk, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the quick calculation. Chloe shrugged, uninterested already, back to her screen. Emily's fingers traced the plastic beads, again slower now, as though testing their weight. I carried the stack of crumpled paper toward the kitchen, needing motion, needing distance. The hallway was dim lit only by the sconce above the console table where the mail usually piled. Dad had left his coat draped over the chair, the wool still holding the chill from outside. As I passed, a folded sheet slipped from the pocket and fluttered to the rug like a wounded bird. I bent to retrieve it, meaning only to tuck it back, but the letterhead caught the light. First National Bank Trust Division. David's name leapt out at me in bold type, followed by a string of numbers that made my pulse stutter. I should have left it. Instead, I unfolded the page just enough to read the header. Temporary hold on shares, Bennett Family Enterprises. The date beneath David's printed name was 2 weeks after the crash. My knees weakened. I pressed the paper flat against my thigh, scanning the fine print, the legal jargon swimming. Footsteps approached Eleanor's heels, clicking on the hardwood. I folded the document quickly, slid it into the pocket of my cardigan, and straightened as she appeared in the doorway. "Sarah, you're hovering," she said, voice honeyed with impatience. "The caterers will handle the rest." She reached past me to smooth Dad's coat, her perfume sharp with gardenias. Linda joined her wine glass in hand, the two of them framed in the golden light like a portrait of entitlement. "Honestly, Mother let her feel useful," Linda murmured, not quite under her breath. Eleanor's laugh was soft conspiratorial. "She's not really one of us anymore, not since she chose that life." The words were the same ones I'd overheard earlier, but colder now, deliberate, meant to wound. I stood there, paper burning against my ribs, and felt something inside me calcify. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, more dangerous. A vow. Emily's laughter drifted in from the parlor, high and clear, untouched by the venom. I pictured her small wrists circled by that discarded trinket, the way she'd thank them with her whole heart. My daughter, who still believed grandmothers hung the moon. I would not let them dim her light. Back in the kitchen, I set the wrapping paper in the recycling bin, movements precise. The caterers had left. Only the faint clatter of dishes remained. I opened the drawer where Eleanor kept the good stationery, the heavy cream stock embossed with her monogram. My fingers found a pen, the weight of it familiar from childhood thank you notes. I wrote nothing yet, only held it, feeling the balance. A plan, still formless, began to take shape like frost spreading across a window pane. Emily appeared in the doorway, barefoot, bracelet glowing against her skin. "Mommy, can I help?" she asked, reaching for a plate. I knelt, smoothing her curls. "You already are, sweetheart," I told her. She beamed, stacking cups with careful pride. I watched her memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way she bit her lip in concentration. Whatever came next, whatever I had to do, it would be for this. For the child who saw rainbows and plastic beads. Later, when the house settled into its nighttime hush, I sat at the kitchen table under the single pendant light. The bank paper lay before me, smoothed flat. David's signature so like his own, yet not. The date impossible. I traced the ink with my fingertip, feeling the slight ridge where the pen had pressed. Someone had forged this. Someone in this house. The realization settled in my stomach like lead, but beneath it a spark. Not fear. Resolve. Emily slept upstairs in the room that had once been mine, the bracelet on her nightstand beside her stuffed giraffe. I had kissed her forehead, whispered that I loved her to the moon and back. She had murmured something about rainbows in her sleep. I stood in the hallway, listening to the grandfather clock mark the quarter hour. The paper in my pocket felt heavier than the bracelet, heavier than the lies. I slipped it into the lining of my purse between the folds of a scarf safe. Downstairs, the fire had burned low embers glowing like watchful eyes. I added a log, watching the flames devour. The heat warmed my face, but not my hands. I thought of David, of the way he used to tease me about my stubborn streak, how I never let go once I'd decided something was worth fighting for. I hadn't known then what I was capable of. I knew now. Emily's innocent trust, the bracelet, the forged paper, they were threads in a tapestry I hadn't seen forming. I would follow each one no matter where it led. Not with shouting or tears. Quietly. Methodically. The way a teacher plans a lesson, one step building on the last until the picture is complete. My daughter would never again be measured against someone else's child and found wanting. I would see to that. I turned off the kitchen light, the sudden dark cool against my skin. Upstairs, Emily's door stood ajar, a sliver of moonlight spilling across the carpet. I paused there, listening to her breathing steady and sure. The bracelet caught the light, a tiny constellation on her wrist. I closed the door softly, the click barely audible. In the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the bank paper now in my lap. I read it again, slowly, letting each word sink in. Temporary hold. Executed by. The signature at the bottom, a ghost of David's hand. My fingers trembled, but my mind was clear. This was only the beginning. That paper wasn't meant for me, but once I read it, I couldn't unsee it. I stood in the guest room with the bank paper trembling between my fingers, the words, temporary hold on shares, burning themselves into my vision like after images from a flashbulb. The date beneath David's printed name, 14 days after the coroner had signed his death certificate, was impossible. Yet there it sat in crisp black ink. I folded the sheet once, twice, until it was small enough to slide into the inner pocket of my purse, right beside the emergency chocolate I kept for Emily's low-sugar days. The paper felt heavier than its weight, a secret with teeth. Morning arrived, pale and reluctant snow pressing against the windows like a living thing. Emily bounded downstairs in her reindeer pajamas, bracelet clacking against the banister. I followed more slowly, the document a silent passenger. Breakfast unfolded in the sunlit dining room. Silver chafing dishes. Linen napkins folded into swans, the faint scent of bacon and betrayal. Dad presided at the head of the table, reading glasses perched on his nose, the Wall Street Journal open to the finance section. Eleanor fluttered with the coffee pot, Linda scrolled emails on her tablet, Chloe begged for extra whipped cream on her waffles. Normalcy performed with Oscar-worthy precision. I waited until the plates were cleared and Emily was occupied building a marshmallow igloo with Chloe in the parlor. Dad retreated to his study as he always did after breakfast, the door left ajar in invitation or habit. I slipped in behind him, the paper now photocopied on the little machine in the upstairs office, original, tucked safely in my suitcase, copy crisp in my hand. The room smelled of leather pipe tobacco, and the particular staleness of old money. Bookshelves rose to the ceiling, law volumes and golf trophies sharing space like uneasy neighbors. He looked up from his ledger, surprise flickering across his patrician features. Sarah. Everything all right? His voice carried the same measured cadence he used with board members, polite but distant. I closed the door with a soft click and crossed the Persian rug that had cost more than my first car. The copy rustled as I laid it on the blotter between us. Can you explain this? I asked, keeping my tone level the way I spoke to parents who insisted their child never misbehaved. Dad adjusted his glasses, scanned the page, and the color drained from his cheeks so completely I thought he might faint. For a moment, the only sound was the tick of the mantel clock. Then he leaned back, Fingers steepled the mask, sliding into place. "It's a formality," he said. "Protective measure after David's passing. The company needed stability." His gaze flicked to the window where snow blurred the view of the rose garden dormant under its white shroud. "Stability," I repeated. The word tasted metallic. "The signature is dated 2 weeks after he died. That's not a formality, Dad. That's forgery." I watched his throat work the way it did when he swallowed unwelcome news. He removed his glasses, polished them with the silk pocket square buying time. "Sarah, you wouldn't understand business," he said at last, the dismissal gentle but absolute. "These things are complicated." David's shares were encumbered. We had to act quickly to prevent a takeover bid. Encumbered. Another word that belonged in boardrooms, not family. I leaned forward, palms flat on the desk. David never mentioned encumbrance. He was proud of those shares, said they were Emily's college fund. My voice cracked on her name and I hated myself for it. Dad's eyes softened a fraction, then hardened again. He was an idealist. The market doesn't reward idealism. He reached for the paper, but I was faster, sliding it back into my grasp. I studied his face, searching for the father who used to push me on the tire swing, who taught me to bait a hook with night crawlers. That man was buried beneath layers of entitlement and expediency. "Who signed his name?" I asked quietly. The question hung between us like incense. Dad's jaw tightened. Legal counsel handled the details. "It's all above board." Above board. Another phrase that meant nothing and everything. I folded the copy once more, tucking it into my sweater pocket. "I'm keeping this," I said. He started to protest, but I was already moving toward the door. My hand closed around the brass knob, cool and solid. "Merry Christmas, Dad." The words tasted like ash, but I delivered them with a smile I didn't feel. Back in the hallway, I pressed my back to the wall, heart hammering against my ribs. The house sounded different now, every creak an accusation. I slipped into the powder room, locked the door, and unfolded the photocopy under the vanity light. The signature stared up at me, David's looping D, the flourish on the T, but the pressure was wrong, too light, too careful. A practiced imitation. Someone had studied his handwriting, traced it like a child, copying cursive. The realization settled in my gut, cold and certain. I thought of Emily in the parlor, her laughter mingling with Chloe's, the bracelet a bright spot of color against her sleeve. She deserved better than hand-me-down insults and forged legacies. I deserved answers. The spark that had flickered last night ignited steady and blue. I would not storm or accuse, not yet. I would gather, watch, wait. Teachers excel at patience. We plant seeds and trust the seasons. Footsteps passed in the hall. Linda's brisk stride. Eleanor's softer shuffle. I flushed the toilet for cover, washed my hands, slowly studying my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked composed, eyes bright with unshed tears. I dried my hands on the monogrammed towel, then returned to the parlor. Emily waved me over, proud of her marshmallow village. "Look, Mommy. The igloo has a door." I knelt, admiring her creation, the way the sugar cubes gleamed like ice. Chloe offered me a miniature candy cane flag. For a moment, the world righted itself. Dad emerged from his study, eventually face composed, pipe clenched between his teeth. He ruffled Emily's hair, called her captain, avoided my gaze. Lunch was announced, prime rib, Yorkshire pudding, the works. We gathered around the table, crystal sparkling conversations, skimming safe topics. Chloe's upcoming piano recital, Linda's charity gala, the neighbor's new Tesla. I smiled past the gravy, memorized every nuance. The photocopy rested against my heart like a second pulse. After lunch, the adults retreated for naps or football. I took Emily sledding on the back hill, her shrieks of joy echoing across the snow. The cold stung my cheeks, but it felt clean, honest. We built a lopsided snowman, gave him Chloe's discarded scarf for color. Emily named him Mr. Sparkles. When we trudged back inside, rosy and exhausted, Eleanor met us with cocoa. She studied Emily's glowing face, then mine, something unreadable in her expression. I met her gaze steadily, the spark inside me now a small, steady flame. Evening brought board games by the fire monopoly because Dad insisted on teaching financial literacy. Emily landed on boardwalk, eyes wide at the rent. I watched Dad explain mortgages and hotels, his voice patient, almost tender. The irony tasted bitter. When Emily bankrupted Chloe with a well-placed hotel, Dad chuckled, pride softening his features. For a moment, I saw the grandfather he could be. Then he glanced at the photocopy's absence on the table, and the mask slipped back into place. Bedtime came early for Emily, her eyelids drooping over a chapter of The Secret Garden. I tucked her in the bracelet now on the nightstand beside a glass of water. She caught my hand. "Mommy, is Grandpa mad at me?" The question sliced clean through me. I kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart. Grown-ups get tired sometimes. Sleep tight." She was out before I reached the door. Downstairs, the house was quiet, only the fire's low crackle and the occasional pop of settling wood. I sat at the kitchen island with a cup of chamomile, the photocopy spread before me under the pendant light. I traced the forged signature again, memorizing every loop and cross. Somewhere in this house, the original existed, probably locked in Dad's safe behind the oil painting of his father. I would find it. I would understand every detail he claimed I couldn't. The flame inside me burned brighter, not with rage, but with purpose. David had trusted this family with his legacy, with our daughter's future. They had taken it, twisted it, hidden it behind signatures and lies. I thought of Emily's snowman melting slowly under the porch light, and felt the same determination. I would not melt. I would endure. I didn't understand business, but I understood betrayal. The morning after Christmas dawned brittle and bright, the kind of light that turns every snowflake into a prism. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing Emily's cocoa mug, the photocopy of the forged document tucked inside a sealed envelope in my purse, when my phone vibrated against the granite counter. The caller ID read Harrison & Lowe, attorneys at law. My pulse skipped. David's estate had been settled years ago. I dried my hands on the dish towel and answered, "Mrs. Bennett. Margaret Lowe. I apologize for the holiday intrusion." Her voice was crisp, Midwestern, the same tone she'd used when reading David's will to a room of stunned relatives. "A conditional codicil in your late husband's estate has just activated. I need you to come to the office today." She paused, the silence heavy with implication. "It's time-sensitive." I glanced toward the parlor where Emily and Chloe were constructing a blanket fort. Activated how I asked, lowering my voice. Everything was finalized. Apparently not everything. Another pause. "Bring identification. And come alone." An hour later, I was in the Subaru, heat blasting against the sub-zero air. The envelope with the photocopy riding shotgun like a silent accomplice. The law office sat in a brick building downtown, holiday wreath still hanging crookedly on the door. Margaret met me in the lobby, silver hair pulled into a severe bun, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. She led me past the reception desk to a small conference room that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. On the table lay a manila folder and a tiny black USB drive, no longer than my thumbnail. "David left this with us 3 years ago," she said, sliding the folder toward me. "The codicil states that if any party specifically, your father makes a material misrepresentation regarding the disposition of David's shares in Bennett Family Enterprises, the sealed contents are to be released to you immediately." She tapped the USB. "Your father's statement yesterday triggered it." I stared at the drive, a cold knot forming in my stomach. He knew, I whispered. David knew they might lie. Margaret's expression softened a fraction. "He was meticulous. Said he wanted to protect you and Emily from family politics." She produced a legal pad. "I'll need you to sign receipt. You can view the contents here or take it home. Your choice." I signed, fingers steady despite the tremor inside. The USB felt warm from her hand, or maybe from my own sudden fever. "I'll watch it here," I said. Privacy mattered now more than convenience. She dimmed the lights and wheeled in a laptop. I inserted the drive. A single video file appeared, time-stamped exactly 10 days before the crash. My breath caught. David's face filled the screen sitting at our kitchen table back home, the one with the chipped corner where Emily had colored outside the lines. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, but his voice was calm, deliberate. "Sarah," he began, and the sound of my name in his living voice nearly undid me. "If you're watching this, they've taken it. The share's the future I built for you and Em. I've seen the way your father looks at the balance sheets like a chessboard where people are pawns. I don't trust him to honor what's ours." He leaned closer to the camera, the overhead light catching the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "There's a second set of documents in the safe deposit box at First National Key taped under the loose floorboard in our bedroom closet. Use them if you have to. And Sarah, don't let them break her spirit. Emily's worth more than any stock certificate." The video ended abruptly, the screen going black. I sat frozen, tears tracking hot down my cheeks. Margaret handed me a box of tissues without comment. 10 days. He'd recorded this 10 days before the accident, before the skid on a dry road, before the coroner's report that never quite sat right with me. I rewound, played it again, memorizing every inflection, every pause. His warning wasn't theoretical. It was prophecy. Margaret cleared her throat. "The codicil also transfers control of the safe deposit box key to you upon activation. I can have a courier deliver it this afternoon." I nodded numbly, clutching the USB like a talisman. "There's one more thing," she said, sliding a second thinner envelope across the table. David left instructions for Emily. To be opened on her 18th birthday or sooner if circumstances warrant. The envelope was sealed with red wax, David's initials pressed into it like a brand. I tucked both items into my coat pocket, the weight of them grounding me. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the world hushed and expectant. I drove home on autopilot, the USB in the cup holder, David's voice looping in my head. They've taken it. He'd known. He'd prepared. And now the baton had passed to me. Emily met me at the door, cheeks flushed from fort building. "Mommy Chloe says blanket forts need passwords. Ours is Rainbow Bracelet." She held up her wrist, the plastic beads catching the foyer light. I knelt, kissing the top of her head, breathing in Johnson's shampoo and childhood. "Perfect password," I told her. Over her shoulder, Eleanor watched from the staircase, expression unreadable. That afternoon, the courier arrived, a discreet young man in a navy peacoat. He handed over a small padded envelope containing the safe deposit key and a note in Margaret's handwriting. "Box 1847, First National Main Branch." I slipped it into the same pocket as the USB, the metal cool against my fingers. Dad was in his study, door closed. Linda and Chloe had gone shopping for post-Christmas sales. The house felt like a stage between acts, props in place, actors momentarily absent. I took Emily to the backyard to feed the birds, scattering seed on the snow, while she chattered about cardinals and blue jays. The cold bit my cheeks, but clarity came with it. David hadn't just left a message. He'd left a map. The forged signature, the temporary hold, my father's dismissal, they were pieces of a puzzle he'd seen coming. I glanced at the study window, curtains drawn tight. Whatever game had started 3 years ago wasn't over. Dinner that night was quiet, the prime rib leftovers reheated with military precision. Dad complimented the Yorkshire pudding, asked Chloe about her new phone apps. Avoided my eyes entirely. I smiled, passed the salt, felt the USB pressed against my heart like a second heartbeat. Emily fell asleep on the couch during It's a Wonderful Life, her head in my lap, bracelet sliding down her arm. I carried her upstairs, tucked her in, then sat at the desk in the guest room with my laptop. I inserted the USB again, this time with headphones volume low. David's face filled the screen, and I let myself study the details I'd missed in shock, the faint bruise on his cheekbone, the way his left hand kept flexing signs of stress I recognized now. He'd been afraid. Not paranoid afraid. And he'd trusted me to finish what he couldn't. I ejected the drive, wrapped it in a silk scarf, and hid it inside the lining of my suitcase, sewn into the seam where no casual search would find it. The safe deposit key went into the hollowed-out base of Emily's stuffed giraffe, a secret compartment I'd created for traveling with valuables. Childish camouflage, perfect disguise. Before bed, I stood at the window watching snow begin again, soft and relentless. David's warning echoed, "Don't let them break her spirit." I thought of Emily's rainbow password, her unshakable belief in magic. They would not break her. They would not break us. The USB was proof the key was access, and I was the executor of a dead man's justice. Sleep came in fragments. David's voice threading through dreams. When I woke before dawn, the house still dark, I knew what I had to do next. The shares weren't just money, they were leverage. And leverage properly applied could move mountains or topple empires. He'd recorded it 10 days before his accident. The house was still wrapped in pre-dawn hush when I slipped downstairs with the USB clenched in my fist. 10 days. David had looked straight into the camera 10 days before the wreck and warned me about someone inside the company. I had always filed the crash under tragic coincidence, a clear December afternoon. Tires suddenly losing grip on a straight stretch of county road, the guardrail giving way like paper. No alcohol, no ice, no mechanical failure according to the official report. Just David gone. But now the phrase "someone inside the company" looped in my skull louder than the furnace kicking on. I brewed coffee strong enough to strip paint, then carried the mug and my laptop to the breakfast nook where the Wi-Fi was strongest. The insurance portal required two-factor authentication. I still had David's old phone in a drawer upstairs, battery long dead, but the SIM card intact. I fetched it, plugged it into a charger, and waited for the ancient screen to glow. While it powered up, I opened the USB on my own machine and let David's video play on mute. I needed his eyes more than his words now. The faint bruise on his cheekbone looked darker in the blue light, and his left hand kept flexing nervous tick he only showed when numbers didn't add up. I paused on that frame, heart thudding. He had been afraid of more than balance sheets. The insurance site finally loaded. I logged in with David's credentials, fingers moving on muscle memory. The dashboard showed a single life policy, $2 million payable to me as primary beneficiary, Emily as contingent. The claim status read, "Processed funds disbursed." Disbursed. I had never seen a dime. I clicked through to the detail page and felt the floor tilt. The claim form was dated 6 weeks after the funeral. Claimant Linda Marie Bennett Harrington. Signature a looping scrawl that mimicked mine, but leaned too far right, the S and Sarah elongated like a snake. My own handwriting slants left. I had practiced cursive with Sister Agnes in 3rd grade, and never broken the habit. This was a forgery, confident and careless. I printed the form, the old inkjet in Dad's study, whirring like an angry bee. While it spat out pages, I dug deeper. Attached was a notarized affidavit swearing I had been emotionally incapacitated and had authorized Linda to act on my behalf. The notary seal belonged to a woman I had never met. I photographed every screen with my phone, then downloaded the PDFs to a new folder labeled Taxes 2025, in case anyone glanced over my shoulder. Methodical, quiet, the way I graded spelling tests. Red pen, no emotion. Upstairs, Emily's door stood ajar. She slept on her stomach, one arm dangling off the mattress bracelet, glinting in the nightlight's glow. I eased the door shut and returned to the kitchen. The printed claim lay beside the cooling coffee. I spread the pages like tarot cards. Linda's address was listed as the payout destination, her condo in the city. Not my little house with the leaky gutter. $2 million rerouted while I was still learning how to file taxes as a widow. The betrayal tasted metallic like blood under the tongue. I opened a browser tab and searched the accident report public record easy enough. The responding officer had noted no skid marks consistent with evasive action, which always puzzled me. David was a cautious driver. He braked for squirrels. The tow company photos showed the passenger side, crumpled driver's side, oddly pristine, as if the car had been T-boned at low speed, then pushed. I zoomed on the guardrail, fresh silver paint transfer, not from David's black sedan. Another vehicle, unmarked, unseen. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. I closed the laptop and carried the printed pages to the guest room. sliding them into the same silk scarf that held the USB. Evidence now lived in layers digital paper memory. I sat on the bed and let the room settle around me. David's voice from the video whispered again someone inside the company. Linda sat on the board, had since David married in and brought his engineering patents to the table. She had access motive and apparently practice forging signatures. Morning crept in gray and reluctant. I showered, dressed in the same jeans and sweater, and went downstairs to make pancakes. Emily bounded in hair wild, demanding chocolate chips. I flipped batter while my mind flipped scenarios. Confrontation would come later. Information first. I needed the safe deposit box, but the bank opened at 9. Plenty of time to act normal. Dad appeared in robe and slippers, newspaper under his arm. "Sleep well?" he asked, voice gravelly. I smiled, slid a pancake onto his plate. "Like a rock." He grunted, oblivious or pretending. Linda drifted in next, yoga perfect, phone in hand. She kissed the air near my cheek. "Coffee smells divine." I poured her a mug, black, no sugar, exactly how she liked it. My hand didn't shake. After breakfast, I bundled Emily into her coat and announced a trip to the library for new books. No one questioned it. Grandparents waved from the porch, breath fogging. The bank sat 3 blocks from the library, a brick fortress with brass fixtures. I parked, told Emily we were making a quick stop for Mommy's papers, and led her inside. The vault teller recognized me from the funeral arrangements. Small towns remember grief. She retrieved box 1847 without comment. Inside the cubicle, I lifted the lid. Stacks of stock certificates, a flash drive labeled patents, and a thin envelope addressed to me in David's handwriting. I slipped everything into my tote, heart racing. Emily traced the brass numbers on the wall. "Are we rich now?" she whispered. I kissed her forehead. "We're safe," I said. "Close enough." Back home, I hid the new evidence in the giraffe's secret compartment, then deleted browsing history, emptied the printer queue, and wiped the keyboard with a disinfectant cloth. Paranoia or prudence? The line blurred. Lunch was tomato soup and grilled cheese, comfort food masking the storm. Linda mentioned an afternoon spa appointment with Mom. Perfect. I volunteered to watch Chloe and Emily, giving me the run of the house. While the girls built Lego towers in the playroom, I slipped into Dad's study. The forged insurance claim burned in my pocket. I needed the original payout stub. The file cabinet was locked, but I knew the spare key hung behind the framed photo of Dad shaking hands with the governor. Inside the drawer, marked personal, lay a manila folder labeled D. Bennett closed. I photographed every page, wire transfer confirmation, bank routing numbers, Linda's endorsement on the back of the check. The amount matched the policy exactly. My signature again authorized the deposit into an account I had never opened. I was sliding the folder back when footsteps echoed in the hall. I locked the drawer, replaced the key, and stepped behind the desk just as Chloe burst in. "Aunt Sarah Emily says the tower needs a queen." I smiled, pulse frantic, and followed her out. Close call, but the photos were already uploading to a cloud folder titled Lesson Plans. That evening, we ate leftover ham. The adults subdued the children, wired on sugar. I watched Linda across the table, her manicured fingers shredding a roll, her laugh too bright. She had cashed in on David's death while I cashed sympathy cards. The dry road crash, the missing skid marks, the silver paint transfer, they weren't coincidences. They were cover. Bedtime found Emily curled against me, bracelet pressed to my cheek. I kissed her temple and whispered, "Daddy's watching over us." She sighed in her sleep, trusting. I lay awake long after piecing the timeline video forgery payout crash. Someone inside the company had wanted David silent. Linda had the means and the signature. I reached for my phone, opened the insurance photos, zoomed on the claimant line. The looping S, the elongated tail. I had seen that handwriting on birthday cards, on permission slips, on the Christmas list taped to the fridge. The signature belonged to my sister. The signature belonged to my sister, and the knowledge settled in my chest like a stone dropped into still water ripples, spreading outward until every breath felt calculated. I closed the photo on my phone, slid it into my pocket, and walked downstairs as if the floorboards were made of eggshells. Breakfast smells drifted from the kitchen bacon cinnamon rolls. Normalcy. I poured orange juice for Emily, added 2 ice cubes the way she liked, and smiled when she thanked me with sticky fingers. No one in the dining room noticed the tremor in my wrist or the way my eyes cataloged exits and expressions. Good. Let them see the grieving widow, the harmless teacher, the sister who still said, please and thank you. Weakness is camouflage. After the dishes were stacked and Eleanor retreated to her needlepoint, I carried Emily's coloring supplies to the sunroom. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, turning dust motes into slow-motion fireworks. Let's make a family tree, I suggested, voice light. Emily clapped, delighted by anything that involved glitter glue. I spread a long sheet of butcher paper across the coffee table and sketched a thick trunk at the bottom. Grandpa and Grandma, go here, I said, drawing 2 sturdy branches. Emily added leaves with abandon, naming each cousin, aunt, uncle. I guided her crayon gently. Where does Grandpa keep his special papers? She scrunched her nose, thinking. Behind the big picture in his study. He told me it's a secret hidey hole. Her marker swooped across the page, a bright red X right over the spot where the portrait of great-grandfather Bennett hung. I kissed the top of her head. Perfect. While she colored hearts around Chloe's name, I excused myself to the guest room. The USB from David's lawyer lay inside its silk scarf cocoon. I plugged it into my laptop, created 3 encrypted backups. One on a micro SD card taped inside Emily's favorite storybook. One uploaded to a cloud folder labeled second grade sight words, and one emailed to a throwaway account I'd opened under the name Concerned Parent. Redundancy is survival. I ejected the drive, wrapped it again, and slipped it into the lining of my winter coat, the same pocket that held the safe deposit key. Evidence scattered like seeds. No single storm could uproot them all. Downstairs, Dad had settled into his leather armchair with the financial section. I drifted in, carrying a tray of fresh coffee and the lemon bars Eleanor kept in the freezer for emergencies. Thought you might need a pick-me-up, I said, voice, soft eyes downcast. He grunted appreciation, took the plate without looking up. I lingered, adjusting the Afghan over his knees the way I used to when I was 10 and desperate for approval. Everything okay with the company, I asked, letting a tremor creep in. I heard Linda mention auditors. He folded the paper, irritation flickering. Nothing you need to worry about, Sarah. Go enjoy your vacation. Dismissal wrapped in kindness. I nodded, biting my lip, the picture of docile concern. Inside, the stone in my chest hardened into flint. Lunch was sandwiches on the porch, the heater humming against the cold. Linda scrolled real estate listings on her tablet, bragging about a ski chalet in Aspen. I buttered Emily's bread, cut the crusts into tiny squares, and laughed at the right moments. When Chloe asked why Aunt Sarah didn't have a big house like Grandma, I shrugged. Teachers don't need mansions, sweetie. We have books. Chloe lost interest. Linda smirked. I filed the smirk away. Afternoon brought board games. I lost spectacularly at Scrabble, misspelling quixotic on purpose, letting Chloe crow. Dad ruffled my hair the way he hadn't since I was 12. Some things never change, he chuckled. I leaned into the touch eyes, misty, and felt the hook set deeper. They saw what they expected, the little sister who couldn't balance a checkbook, who cried at commercials, who needed protecting. Perfect. After the girls were tucked in for naps, I borrowed Dad's laptop under the pretense of checking school email. The study smelled of pipe smoke and entitlement. I sat in his chair, the leather still warm, and opened a private browsing window. Years of grading papers had taught me efficiency. I typed fast. The rival company, Harlan Industries, had a public tip line for corporate irregularities. I attached scanned images of the forged insurance claim and the post-death share transfer, redacting my name, but leaving Linda's and Dad's crystal clear. Subject line: Bennett Family Enterprises. Possible fraud. Body-attached documents suggest improper handling of deceased partner's assets. Recommend immediate review. I routed the email through 3 anonymizers, scheduled it for 3:17 a.m., and cleared the cache. Footsteps in the hall made me freeze. Eleanor's voice called for Dad. I closed the lid, heart racing, and slipped out the side door to the sunroom. Emily woke cranky, demanding a snack. I carried her to the kitchen on my hip, humming the lullaby David used to sing. While she munched apple slices, I watched Grandpa hang his coat in the foyer closet. The red X on her drawing burned in my memory behind the portrait. I filed that away too. Dinner was roast chicken conversation drifting to Chloe's upcoming dance recital. I complimented Linda's new highlights, asked about her trainer, laughed when she bragged about spin class. Every compliment was a breadcrumb leading them farther from suspicion. Dad carved the bird with surgical precision, passing me the white meat I hated, but accepted with gratitude. I chewed slowly, tasting nothing. After the table was cleared, I volunteered for dish duty. The kitchen window faced the dark backyard snow, starting again in lazy spirals. I scrubbed pots with methodical circles, mind racing ahead. The email would land in Harlan's inbox while the house slept. By morning, questions would ripple outward. I dried my hands, hung the towel neatly, and felt the flint strike its first spark. Upstairs, Emily begged for one more chapter of Charlotte's Web. I read about the goose egg's voice steady while my thoughts wrote a different story. When she finally drifted off, Bracelet clutched like a talisman, I sat at the desk and opened the laptop one last time. The scheduled email showed queued. I hovered over delete, then let the cursor rest. This was the point of no return. I clicked away, closed the lid, and stared at the red X on Emily's drawing, now taped to the wall above the dresser. A child's innocent mark, a widow's loaded gun. I slipped into bed beside Emily, her small breaths warm against my shoulder. The house creaked around us, old bones settling. Somewhere down the hall, Linda laughed at something on television. Dad's study light glowed under the door. I lay awake, cataloging every detail, the forged payout, the red X, the email ticking like a bomb. Revenge is not a scream. It is a whisper that grows until it fills the room. At 3:17 a.m., the send button pressed itself. Somewhere in a server farm, electrons danced. And that story started with one simple email. The email had flown into the night like a silent arrow, and I slept only in fragments, waking every hour to check that the house still breathed in its usual rhythm. By the time pale December light crept through the curtains, I was already dressed, hair twisted into a knot, coffee cooling untouched on the nightstand. Emily stirred beside me, mumbling about rainbows, and I kissed her forehead before slipping downstairs. The family tree drawing lay exactly where I had left it, taped crookedly to the guest room wall, its crayon branches sprawling like a child's wild hope. I studied it in the gray hush, tracing the trunk I had sketched, the leaves Emily had dotted with glitter. And there it was again, the bright red X she had scrawled with such glee right over the rectangle I had labeled Grandpa's study. I had watched her make that mark yesterday afternoon, giggling as she announced it was treasure. I had smiled then, thinking only of how proud she would be when Grandpa saw his name circled in gold. Now the X glared back at me, no longer playful. Last week, while helping Dad hang the holiday garland, I had seen him pause behind the heavy oil portrait of his own father, fingers brushing the frame's lower corner. He had glanced over his shoulder, caught me watching, and quickly moved on to the next nail. At the time, I had thought nothing of it. Old houses have quirks, and old men have habits. But Emily's X sat precisely where his hand had lingered, a perfect overlay. My pulse began to drum. I lifted the drawing from the wall tape, peeling with a soft rip, and carried it to the window where the light was stronger. The paper was cheap newsprint, the kind that drank crayon wax and held every ridge. I turned it sideways, then upside down, but the X stayed centered on the study wall, its arms uneven, one slightly longer, the way Emily always drew when she was excited. I pressed the sheet flat against the glass, and the morning sun revealed faint indentations beneath the red, the ghost of a rectangle, the outline of a safe door. She must have seen Grandpa open it, must have watched from the hallway while he thought she was busy with blocks. Children notice everything adults assume is invisible. I laid the drawing on the dresser and stared at it until the lines blurred. No USB, no forged document, No anonymous tip could match the purity of this evidence, a child's art, innocent and irrefutable. If the safe behind that portrait held the original share transfer, the real payout stub, or my breath caught something that explained the crash, then Emily had handed me the key without knowing it. I reached for my phone, hands trembling now, and opened the camera. The shutter clicked once, twice, 3 times, capturing every angle, every glitter speck, every wobbly letter of Grandpa beneath the X. I zoomed on the mark itself, the wax so thick it cast a tiny shadow, and felt my heart race like a trapped bird against my ribs. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Linda's brisk tread heading for coffee. I folded the drawing carefully, slid it into the manila envelope I had used for school permission slips, and tucked the envelope inside my sweater against my skin. The phone went into my pocket photos, already uploading to the cloud folder, disguised as Emily's artwork. I stepped into the bathroom, flushed the toilet for cover, and stared at my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked calm, cheeks flushed from cold eyes, bright with something that might have been fear or triumph. I practiced a smile, the same one I gave parents on conference day, and went downstairs. Emily was already at the table legs, swinging syrup on her chin. "Mommy, can we show Grandpa my picture?" she asked, mouthful of pancake. I smoothed her hair. "After breakfast, sweetie. Let's surprise him." Dad shuffled in robe, cinched tight newspaper tucked under his arm. He ruffled Emily's curls, called her captain, and poured coffee without meeting my eyes. I buttered toast, cut it into soldiers, and watched him settle at the head of the table like a king, unaware his throne was rotting. The morning unfolded in ordinary slices, dishes, clinking, Chloe begging for screen time. Eleanor planning a trip to the garden center for poinsettias. I moved through it all with deliberate slowness, refilling juice glasses, wiping counters, laughing at the right jokes. Inside the envelope, burned against my ribs, the X, a brand. When Dad announced he had calls to make and disappeared into his study, I felt the hook set deeper. Emily tugged my sleeve. "Now," she whispered. I nodded, heart hammering. We found him at his desk, phone to his ear, gesturing vaguely at spreadsheets. Emily marched forward, drawing held high like a battle standard. "Grandpa, look what I made." He ended the call with a brisk, "I'll handle it," and turned smile automatic. I watched his face as Emily unfolded the paper on his blotter, the red X landing exactly where the portrait hung behind him. His eyes flicked to the mark, then to me, a flash of something, recognition alarm, gone as quickly as it came. "Very creative, Captain," he said, voice steady. He lifted her onto his knee, but his hand trembled slightly as he traced the trunk. "Family is everything." Emily beamed, oblivious. I stood in the doorway, arms loose at my sides, the envelope hidden beneath my sweater. "She worked so hard," I said softly. "Every detail." Dad's gaze met mine over her head, and for a moment the air between us crackled. Then Eleanor called from the hall about lunch reservations, and the moment shattered. He set Emily down, folded the drawing with care, and slid it into his top drawer. "We'll frame this," he promised. Emily skipped out, mission accomplished. I lingered, watching the drawer, closed the key, turning with a decisive click. Back in the sunroom, I opened my phone and stared at the photos. The X was unmistakable, a child's treasure map to an adult's secrets. I zoomed until the crayon ridges filled the screen, then saved the images to 3 separate locations. My hands no longer trembled. They moved with the precision of a surgeon. I slipped the phone away and went to help Emily choose a sweater for lunch. The drawing was gone, but its ghost lived in pixels and memory. Lunch was quiche at the club, linen napkins, hushed voices. I smiled at the waiter, ordered salad, and watched Dad check his phone every 5 minutes. Harlan Industries would have received the email by now. Auditors would be circling. I speared a cherry tomato juice, bursting red against white porcelain. Emily chattered about snow forts. Linda complained about traffic. Eleanor planned the New Year's menu. I nodded, laughed, and felt the X burning between us like a secret star. That afternoon, the girls napped, and I sat on the window seat with a book I didn't read. Snow fell again, soft and relentless, erasing footprints in the driveway. I thought of the safe behind the portrait, the drawer now holding Emily's drawing like a hostage. Dad had taken the bait. He would move whatever was inside, or he would leave it thinking a child's scribble was harmless. Either way, I had the map. I closed the book, pressed my palm to the cool glass, and felt the future shift beneath my feet. Evening brought cocoa and carols. The family gathered around the piano while Chloe plinked out jingle bells. I stood behind Emily, hands on her shoulders, and watched Dad's reflection in the window. He smiled, sang off key, but his eyes kept drifting to the study door. I sang too, voice blending with the others, and felt the rhythm of a different song entirely. The X was no longer on paper. It was etched in my mind, a beacon. Bedtime came with stories and kisses. Emily fell asleep, clutching her giraffe, the one with the hidden compartment. I sat beside her, stroking her hair, and listened to the house settle. Somewhere down the hall, a drawer opened and closed. Footsteps soft, deliberate. I smiled into the dark. The game had rules now, and I knew them all. I slipped downstairs one last time, phone in hand, and stood in the foyer where moonlight painted the floor silver. I opened the photos again, the red X glowing like a wound. My heart raced, but not with fear. With certainty. A child's crayon mark was about to open Pandora's box. The morning after I stood in the moonlit foyer, the house woke to the smell of panic beneath the coffee. Dad's phone buzzed on the kitchen island before the kettle whistled. He snatched it up, face tightening as he read the screen. Harlan's calling an emergency board meeting, he muttered, thumb already dialing. Linda drifted in wearing silk pajamas, hair perfect even at dawn, and caught the tail end. On a holiday week, she asked, pouring orange juice with theatrical calm. I buttered toast for Emily, humming Frosty the Snowman under my breath, eyes wide with practiced confusion. Inside, the crayon X still glowed like a coal against my ribs. By 10 o'clock, the study door had slammed so many times the hinges groaned. Dad's voice leaked through the walls, sharp clipped the tone he used when quarterly profits missed by a decimal. I kept Emily in the sunroom with watercolor paints, letting her smear blue across yesterday's newsprint, while I eavesdropped from the hallway. Phrases floated out: anonymous tip, insurance irregularities, immediate audit. Each word landed like a pebble in a pond, ripples widening. I pressed my back to the wallpaper, counting heartbeats, memorizing inflections. Linda emerged first, cheeks blotched red beneath her foundation. She cornered Dad in the foyer, voice hissing. They're asking for the payout ledger on David's policy. Specifically. Dad's reply was a growl. Then give them the ledger. I stepped into view, carrying a tray of cocoa steam curling like question marks. Everything okay? I asked, voice small. Linda whirled, eyes narrowing. It's nothing you need to worry about, Sarah. Go back to your finger paints. I nodded, biting my lip, and retreated. The cocoa trembled only after I turned the corner. Lunch was canceled. The dining room became a war room. Spreadsheets covered the mahogany table. Laptops glowed, post-it notes bloomed like yellow weeds. I brought sandwiches on a silver tray, turkey cranberry, the crusts cut off because Emily insisted, and lingered to refill water glasses. Harlan's auditor, a thin man with a voice like a paper cut, sat at Dad's right, tapping a pen against a thick folder. We'll need signatures on every disbursement over 50,000, he said. Dad's jaw worked. Linda hovered, refilling her own glass with something amber from the sideboard. The questions zeroed in on the insurance claim. Funds were routed to an account in Mrs. Harrington's name, the auditor noted, sliding a printout across the table. Linda's manicured nail tapped the page. That was authorized. Sarah was incapacitated. The word hung in the air like smoke. I set down the water pitcher, letting my hand shake just enough. Incapacitated, I echoed, voice cracking on cue. I don't remember signing anything. Head swiveled. Dad's eyes flicked to me, then away. The auditor's pen paused. We have a notarized affidavit, he said, producing another sheet. I leaned over, squinting as if nearsighted. The signature was mine in shape, only the loops too perfect, the pressure too even. That's not how I write my S, I whispered, letting tears pool. Emily wandered in, paint on her cheeks, and climbed into my lap. The room softened for a heartbeat. Even auditors have children. Linda's composure fractured. You were grieving Sarah. I handled the paperwork so you wouldn't have to. Her voice climbed an octave. You thanked me. I rocked Emily gently, letting the silence stretch. I thanked you for bringing casseroles, I said at last, soft enough that Dad had to lean in. Not for $2 million. The auditor's eyebrows rose like theater curtains. Dad cleared his throat. This is a family matter. No, the auditor interrupted. This is a fiduciary matter. We'll need bank statements, wire confirmations, and the original claim form. Linda's glass slipped amber liquid pooling across the tablecloth like a bloodstain. The clash erupted in the hallway 10 minutes later, after the auditor requested privacy with Dad. Linda cornered me by the coat closet, breath hot with bourbon. What game are you playing? She hissed. You think you can waltz in here with your sad widow act and ruin everything? I clutched Emily's mitten, letting my shoulders curve inward. I don't know what you mean, I said, voice trembling. Someone sent those documents, not me. Her eyes searched mine, hunting for the lie, and found only wide-eyed bewilderment. She shoved past me, heels stabbing the runner rug. Dad emerged, looking 10 years older. Tie askew. He pulled me into the parlor door, half closed. Sarah, whatever you think you know. I know Linda signed my name. I cut in tears, spilling now, real ones fueled by memory. I know the money never came to Emily's trust. He rubbed his temples. There were debts. The company was leveraged. It was temporary. Temporary. The same word from the forged share paper. I let my knees buckle slightly, catching the sofa arm. David trusted you, I whispered. Dad's face crumpled. For a moment I saw the father who once carried me on his shoulders through the county fair. Then the mask slid back. We'll sort it. Just stay out of it. He patted my shoulder awkwardly and left me swaying. I dried my eyes with the heel of my hand, checked that Emily was still painting, and slipped into the powder room. The mirror showed flushed cheeks, bright eyes, grief weaponized. I texted the school secretary a vague excuse about a family emergency, buying another day. Back in the dining room, the auditor packed his briefcase. We'll reconvene tomorrow with counsel, he said. Dad nodded, defeated. Linda stood at the window, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles blanched. Evening settled like a bruise. Dinner was silent takeout pizza because no one could face cooking. Chloe asked why Grandpa looked sad. Emily offered him the last slice with pepperoni shaped like a heart. I chewed cardboard crust and watched the storm gather. Phones buzzed with increasingly urgent texts, board members, lawyers, the CFO who had taken a sudden sick day. Dad excused himself to the study door, locked. Linda disappeared upstairs, slamming hers. Eleanor wrung her hands in the kitchen, murmuring about reputations. I tucked the girls in early, reading extra pages of Charlotte's Web until Emily's eyes drooped. Downstairs, the auditor's car crunched away on the gravel. I poured myself tea I didn't drink and stood at the window watching snow erase tire tracks. The email had been a pebble. The audit was the avalanche. Tomorrow would bring accountants' subpoenas, maybe reporters at the gate. Linda's composure was a cracked veneer. Dad's authority leaked like air from a punctured tire. I had played my part, the shocked sister, the fragile widow, and they had swallowed it whole. In the quiet, I felt the dominoes tip one after another, gathering speed. The insurance fraud was only the first tile. Behind it lay the shares, the crash, the safe I now knew how to find. I set the untouched tea on the counter and climbed the stairs, each step deliberate. The real storm hadn't hit it, was just thunder before the lightning. The thunder rolled for 3 more days, a low growl that never quite broke into rain. Auditors came and went in dark sedans, their briefcases heavy with questions. Dad's study became a bunker door locked, blinds drawn, phone pressed to his ear until his voice cracked. Linda paced the upstairs hall like a caged panther, nails, tapping out Morse code on her phone screen. Eleanor fluttered between them with trays of tea and sympathy, her pearls clicking like worry beads. I kept to the kitchen and the sunroom baking cookies, with Emily wiping flour from her nose, letting the scent of vanilla mask the rot. Every smile I offered was a mask. Every how can I help a calculated breath. On the morning of January 5th, Eleanor cornered me in the laundry room while I folded tiny socks. "We need to heal," she announced, voice pitched low so the hum of the dryer swallowed it. "Three Kings Day tomorrow. A proper dinner, just family. No auditors, no phones. We'll put this ugliness behind us." Her eyes, the same cornflower blue as mine, pleaded beneath the steel. I paused, sock half turned, and let confusion cloud my face. "Heal," I echoed, soft as tissue. "I thought the company was handling everything." She touched my arm, manicured fingers cool. "The company will survive. Families must choose to." I nodded, eyes misting on cue, and she swept out, satisfied, already planning centerpieces. Emily overheard the invitation and begged to make Grandma a gift. We spent the afternoon in the craft room, glue sticks and glitter littering the table like confetti from a happier war. I cut cardboard into a nesting box, 3 layers each, smaller than the last painted gold, and tied with red ribbon. Emily decorated the lid with sticker stars and a lopsided crown for the Magi. While she hunted for the perfect bow, I turned the bottom layer over, and with a fine-tip pencil etched 4 faint numbers along the inner rim. 1, 8, 4, 7. The safe deposit box number light enough to miss unless you knew to look. I sanded the graphite with my thumb until it was a ghost, then sealed the box with a decoupage of tissue snowflakes. Emily clapped when I pronounced it perfect. "Grandma will love the surprise inside," she crowed. I smiled, throat tight. The surprise was for all of us. Three Kings Day dawned clear and biting. The dining room transformed, white linens, crystal candlesticks, the good china with the gold rim that only emerged for weddings and funerals. Eleanor had roasted a crown, pork apples glazed to amber rosemary sprigs like tiny victory flags. Dad carved with mechanical precision tie, loosened eyes bloodshot. Linda wore black as if attending her own wake, lips painted the same red as the ribbon on Emily's gift. Chloe set the table with military focus, counting forks twice. I floated between kitchen and dining room in a soft gray dress, hair loose, the picture of conciliatory grace. We sat at 6 sharp, the grandfather clock chiming like a referee. Conversation tiptoed around landmines, the weather. Chloe's upcoming spelling bee, Emily's newfound love of origami. I passed the rolls, complimented the glaze, asked Eleanor about her bridge club. Every question was a feather. Every answer a brick in the wall I was building between us. Dad raised his glass, sparkling cider for the girls, Cabernet for the adults, and toasted fresh starts. His hand shook. A single drop of wine bled into the tablecloth like a warning. Emily waited until dessert, individual chocolate torts shaped like crowns before sliding from her chair. "Grandma, I made you something." She presented the box with both hands, ribbon curling like a fuse. Eleanor's face softened, the first genuine expression I'd seen in days. "For me." She untied the bow, lifted the lid, and cooed over the origami camel Emily had folded inside the top layer. "Exquisite, darling." Chloe leaned in, admiring the glitter. Linda managed a tight smile. Dad refilled his glass. Emily bounced on her toes. "There's more." Eleanor set the camel aside and lifted the second layer. Inside lay a tiny crown made of pipe cleaners, and foil, the kind of craft that takes an 8-year-old an hour and a grandmother's heart a second to melt. "Oh, sweetheart," Eleanor murmured, eyes glassy. She hugged Emily close, the box balanced on her lap. I watched the ribbon trail across the tablecloth, watched Dad's gaze flicker to it, watched Linda's knuckles whiten around her fork. The third layer remained, sealed ribbon knotted tight, the faint numbers hidden against the cardboard's underside. Polite applause rippled. I dabbed my lips with the napkin, pulse steady. "Open the last one, Mom," I encouraged, voice honey over gravel. Eleanor hesitated, sensing the shift, but Emily's eagerness was irresistible. She tugged the final ribbon. The box resisted, then gave with a soft click. The room held its breath. Eleanor peered inside, smile faltering. Whatever she saw drained the color from her cheeks. The pipe cleaner crown slipped from her fingers and rolled across the linen like a fallen star. Dad half rose, chair scraping. Linda leaned forward, eyes wide. Chloe whispered. Grandma Emily beamed, oblivious. I sat very still, hands folded in my lap, the mask perfect. Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. The candle flames trembled in a draft none of us felt. Tension coiled beneath the polite smiles thick enough to choke on. Then the second layer of the box clicked open, something none of us expected. And Emily's family tree drawing fluttered onto the white linen like a white flag of surrender. The crayon branches caught the candlelight, but it was the back of the sheet that froze the room. 4 faint pencil numbers, 1847, etched in my own careful hand weeks earlier, now glowing like neon under Eleanor's trembling fingers. Emily had seen Grandpa punch those digits into the safe behind the portrait. She had simply copied what she thought was a game. Eleanor's breath hitched. Dad's carving knife clattered against the platter. Linda's wineglass tipped red, blooming across the cloth like an accusation. I rose slowly, every eye tracking me as if I had grown a second head. Grandma needs help with her gift, I said, voice soft, the same tone I used when a second grader confessed to breaking the class hamster's wheel. Emily beamed, proud of her artwork. I lifted the drawing from Eleanor's lap, turned it over with deliberate calm, and held it to the chandelier so the numbers shimmered. Safe combination, I explained, conversational. Emily watched Grandpa open it last week. She thought it was treasure. Dad lunged halfway out of his chair. Sarah. I met his gaze, unblinking. Shall we see what the treasure is? The question hung like incense. No one moved. Chloe's mouth formed a perfect O. Linda's knuckles went white around her napkin. Eleanor clutched the pipe cleaner crown as if it could shield her. I walked the length of the dining room, drawing in hand heels, clicking a slow countdown on the hardwood. The study door stood ajar. Firelight flickering across the portrait of great-grandfather Bennett, his eyes stern beneath painted brows. I felt the family trail behind me. Dad's heavy tread, Linda's staccato heels, Eleanor's whispery shuffle, the girls' bare feet padding like curious kittens. No one spoke. The air thickened with the scent of roasted pork and dread. I stopped before the portrait, lifted it from its hook with both hands, and set it gently on the rug. The wall safe gleamed dully, a small brass dial above a keypad. I knelt, drawing aligned with the numbers, and spun the dial 1847. The mechanism sighed open with a soft thunk that echoed like a gavel. Inside lay a manila folder, edges curled, and a single lavender envelope sealed with a kiss of wax. Dad reached past me, but I was faster, sliding the folder free. I stood turned to face them, the fire at my back painting us all in hellish orange. Forged contracts, I announced, flipping the folder open. The top sheet was the share transfer, David's signature dated 2 weeks post-mortem, the ink still crisp. Beneath it, the original insurance payout stub, $2 million deposited into an account labeled L. Harrington Discretionary. I held it up between 2 fingers. And this I continued, voice steady as Linda's love letter to her accountant confessing she moved the money before Sarah noticed. Linda made a strangled sound. Dad's face drained to ash. Eleanor sank into the leather wingback pipe cleaner crown crushed in her fist. Chloe whispered, "Mommy." Emily tugged my sleeve. Did I do good? I smoothed her hair. You did perfect, sweetheart. I laid the documents on the desk, like evidence in a courtroom. The confession letter was handwritten. Linda's looping scrawl, unmistakable. David's death was convenient, but the payout had to vanish before the widow woke up. Wire it to the Caymans, then we're free. Signed with a heart dotted in red ink. I tapped the heart. Poetic. Linda lunged for the letter. I stepped aside. She stumbled into Dad's arms. He held her up, but his eyes never left the page. You told me it was a loan, he rasped. Linda's mascara ran in black rivers. It was supposed to be temporary. The word cracked like a whip. I folded my arms, the drawing still in one hand. Temporary forgery. Temporary theft. temporary grief. My voice stayed level, the calm of a teacher correcting a child who has lied about homework. I didn't destroy this family, I said, meeting each gaze in turn. I just turned the lights on. Silence fell thick as the snow outside. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Chloe began to cry softly. Emily hugged my leg. Dad's shoulders sagged. The king dethroned by crayon and truth. Eleanor's lips moved soundlessly, pearls clicking against her teeth. Mom whispered Sarah, "What have you done?" And I smiled, "Only what you taught me." My smile lingered in the firelit study like a photograph frozen mid-flash, and the silence that followed stretched so taut I could almost hear the snowflakes landing outside. Eleanor's whisper hung in the air unanswered for a heartbeat, until Dad's knees buckled and he caught the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The confession letter fluttered from Linda's fingers and settled on the Persian rug like a dead leaf. Emily, sensing the shift, pressed closer to my side. Chloe began to cry in earnest, a thin, bewildered sound that cut straight through the adult wreckage. I knelt to Emily's level, smoothing her curls. "Go find your coloring book, sweetheart. Mommy needs to talk to the grown-ups." She obeyed without question, skipping out as if the world hadn't just cracked open. Chloe followed, sniffling, and the door clicked shut behind them, leaving the four of us in a tableau of ruin. I stood again, documents still in hand, and watched the dominoes I had nudged days ago finally topple. The first tremor came before dawn the next morning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with a news alert. Bennett Family Enterprises. Rocked by fraud allegations. I sat up in the dark, heart racing, and opened the article. A local business blog had received an anonymous packet scans of the forged contracts, the love letter confession, the insurance stub. By the time I'd brewed coffee, the story had metastasized across every financial feed. Reporters camped at the gates, their camera lights strobing through the curtains like paparazzi lightning. Dad's phone began its death rattle at 6:30. The board had convened an emergency vote and suspended him pending investigation. His name vanished from the company website before the sun cleared the trees. Stock opened at 9 and plunged like a stone in deep water. I watched the ticker on the kitchen television while Emily ate cereal, oblivious. Shares that had hovered at $42 the day before cratered to 19 by noon, then 14, then single digits. The crawl read, "Trading halted in red." Dad stood in the doorway in his robe, unshaven eyes hollow. "They've frozen my accounts," he said, voice gravel. "Everything." I poured him coffee he didn't drink and said nothing. The silence between us had weight now measurable in lost millions. Linda's fall was swifter and more public. Detectives arrived at 10 with a warrant, polite but firm. They took her laptop, her phone, the designer handbag where she kept a second burner. She stood on the porch in yoga pants and yesterday's mascara, screaming about harassment while cameras rolled. "This is a witch hunt!" she shrieked, but the lead detective simply read the charges: wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Handcuffs glinted in the winter sun as they led her to the unmarked sedan. Chloe watched from the window face pressed to the glass, and I pulled the curtains closed before the tears started. Eleanor took the news in the parlor, seated on the brocade sofa that had hosted generations of holiday photos. I brought her tea. She stared through it as if it were air. When the anchor on the noon broadcast announced Linda's arrest, Eleanor's cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood. Porcelain shards skittered like ice. She folded forward, a sound escaping that was half sob, half animal keen. I knelt, gathering the pieces, but she waved me away. "Leave them," she whispered. "Everything's broken." Her collapse was quiet, almost dignified. She simply curled into herself, pearls cutting red crescents into her palm, where she clutched them too tight. By evening, the media storm had become a hurricane. Satellite trucks lined the street. Drones buzzed overhead like angry hornets. A reporter cornered Dad on the driveway, shouting questions about embezzlement and cover-ups. He raised a hand to shield his face and stumbled back inside. The board issued a statement, full cooperation with authorities. Leadership transition underway. Translation. Dad was radioactive. His portrait still hung in the corporate lobby, but someone had already ordered the nameplate removed. I moved through the chaos like a ghost in my own life. I answered the door for no one, cooked macaroni for the girls, fielded calls from lawyers with calm deflections. Emily asked why Grandma wouldn't eat. Chloe asked if her mom was coming home tonight. I gave them the same gentle lies teachers perfect over years. Everything will be okay soon. Inside, I cataloged each blow, the stock ticker frozen at $4, and changed the voicemail from the DA confirming Linda's arraignment, the email from the board formally stripping Dad of all titles. Karma, precise and merciless, tallied the score. Night fell hard. Reporters' lights swept the windows like searchlights. Eleanor lay on the chaise in the conservatory, a throw blanket tucked under her chin, eyes open but unseeing. Dad paced the study, whiskey glass empty, muttering about lawsuits and legacy. I stood in the doorway and watched him unravel thread by thread. "We can still fix this," he said, not to me but to the portrait on the wall. "Spin it as a rogue employee." I almost laughed. The rogue employee was his daughter, and the spin was already spinning out of control. I slipped upstairs to check on the girls. Emily slept curled around her giraffe. Chloe clutched her mother's silk scarf like a lifeline. I kissed their foreheads and felt the weight of what I had wrought settle on my shoulders, not guilt, but gravity. The house groaned under it, old beams protesting the strain. Downstairs, a glass shattered Dad, I assumed, or Eleanor finally giving in to the grief. I did not go to them. Some falls must be felt in full. Later, when the reporters thinned and the snow began again, I stood at the window and watched the world remake itself in real time. The empire David had helped build, the one my family had guarded with lies and locks, crumbled in a single day. Stock worthless reputations, shredded freedom traded for orange jumpsuits. I pressed my palm to the cold glass and felt the vibration of distant headlines. The villains had their reckoning swift and public, and I had been the quiet hand that pushed the first stone. But I didn't know the truth had one more card to play. My smile lingered in the firelit study like a photograph frozen mid-flash, and the silence that followed stretched so taut I could almost hear the snowflakes landing outside. Eleanor's whisper hung in the air unanswered for a heartbeat, until Dad's knees buckled and he caught the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The confession letter fluttered from Linda's fingers and settled on the Persian rug like a dead leaf. Emily, sensing the shift, pressed closer to my side. Chloe began to cry in earnest, a thin, bewildered sound that cut straight through the adult wreckage. I knelt to Emily's level, smoothing her curls. "Go find your coloring book, sweetheart. Mommy needs to talk to the grown-ups." She obeyed without questions, skipping out as if the world hadn't just cracked open. Chloe followed, sniffling, and the door clicked shut behind them, leaving the four of us in a tableau of ruin. I stood again, documents still in hand, and watched the dominoes I had nudged days ago finally topple. The first tremor came before dawn the next morning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with a news alert. Bennett Family Enterprises rocked by fraud allegations. I sat up in the dark, heart racing, and opened the article. A local business blog had received an anonymous packet scans of the forged contracts, the love letter confession, the insurance stub. By the time I'd brewed coffee, the story had metastasized across every financial feed. Reporters camped at the gates, their camera lights strobing through the curtains like paparazzi lightning. Dad's phone began its death rattle at 6:30. The board had convened an emergency vote and suspended him pending investigation. His name vanished from the company website before the sun cleared the trees. Stock opened at 9 and plunged like a stone in deep water. I watched the ticker on the kitchen television while Emily ate cereal, oblivious. Shares that had hovered at $42 the day before cratered to 19 by noon, then 14, then single digits. The crawl read, "Trading halted in red." Dad stood in the doorway in his robe, unshaven, eyes hollow. "They've frozen my accounts," he said, voice gravel. "Everything." I poured him coffee he didn't drink and said nothing. The silence between us had weight now measurable in lost millions. Linda's fall was swifter and more public. Detectives arrived at 10 with a warrant, polite but firm. They took her laptop, her phone, the designer handbag where she kept a second burner. She stood on the porch in yoga pants and yesterday's mascara, screaming about harassment while cameras rolled. "This is a witch hunt!" she shrieked, but the lead detective simply read the charges: wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Handcuffs glinted in the winter sun as they led her to the unmarked sedan. Chloe watched from the window, face pressed to the glass, and I pulled the curtains closed before the tears started. Eleanor took the news in the parlor, seated on the brocade sofa that had hosted generations of holiday photos. I brought her tea. She stared through it as if it were air. When the anchor on the noon broadcast announced Linda's arrest, Eleanor's cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood. Porcelain shards skittered like ice. She folded forward, a sound escaping that was half sob, half animal keen. I knelt, gathering the pieces, but she waved me away. "Leave them," she whispered. "Everything's broken." Her collapse was quiet, almost dignified. She simply curled into herself, pearls cutting red crescents into her palm where she clutched them too tight. By evening, the media storm had become a hurricane. Satellite trucks lined the street. Drones buzzed overhead like angry hornets. A reporter cornered Dad on the driveway, shouting questions about embezzlement and cover-ups. He raised a hand to shield his face and stumbled back inside. The board issued a statement: full cooperation with authorities. Leadership transition underway. Translation: Dad was radioactive. His portrait still hung in the corporate lobby, but someone had already ordered the nameplate removed. I moved through the chaos like a ghost in my own life. I answered the door, for no one cooked macaroni for the girls, fielded calls from lawyers with calm deflections. Emily asked why Grandma wouldn't eat. Chloe asked if her mom was coming home tonight. I gave them the same gentle lies teachers perfect over years. Everything will be okay soon. Inside, I cataloged each blow, the stock ticker frozen at $4, and changed the voicemail from the DA confirming Linda's arraignment, the email from the board formally stripping Dad of all titles. Karma, precise and merciless, tallied the score. Night fell hard. Reporters' lights swept the windows like searchlights. Eleanor lay on the chaise in the conservatory, a throw blanket tucked under her chin, eyes open but unseeing. Dad paced the study whiskey glass, empty, muttering about lawsuits and legacy. I stood in the doorway and watched him unravel thread by thread. "We can still fix this," he said. Not to me, but to the portrait on the wall. Spin it as a rogue employee. I almost laughed. The rogue employee was his daughter, and the spin was already spinning out of control. I slipped upstairs to check on the girls. Emily slept curled around her giraffe. Chloe clutched her mother's silk scarf like a lifeline. I kissed their foreheads and felt the weight of what I had wrought settle on my shoulders. Not guilt, but gravity. The house groaned under it, old beams protesting the strain. Downstairs, a glass shattered Dad, I assumed, or Eleanor finally giving in to the grief. I did not go to them. Some falls must be felt in full. Later, when the reporters thinned and the snow began again, I stood at the window and watched the world remake itself in real time. The empire David had helped build, the one my family had guarded with lies and locks, crumbled in a single day. Stock worthless reputations, shredded freedom traded for orange jumpsuits. I pressed my palm to the cold glass and felt the vibration of distant headlines. The villains had their reckoning swift and public, and I had been the quiet hand that pushed the first stone. But I didn't know the truth had one more card to play. The note trembled between my fingers like a leaf caught in a draft, and I read it twice more in the fluorescent corridor before folding it small and sliding it into my pocket next to Emily's crayon X. You were right. 3 words, shaky but deliberate, the first honest sentence Dad had ever written to me. I returned to the ICU glass where Eleanor stood vigil, her silhouette framed by blinking monitors. She turned when I entered, eyes puffy but sharp. "He's asking for you again," she said, voice brittle. I nodded, stepped past her and pulled the curtain for privacy. Dad's eyes tracked me clearer now, the left side of his mouth still drooping, but the right corner lifting in a half-smile that looked painful. A notepad lay on the tray table, pen balanced across it like a bridge. He lifted the pen with effort, knuckles swollen. and began to write in slow, deliberate strokes. I sat on the plastic chair, hands in my lap, and waited. The ventilator hissed. The heart monitor beeped a steady march. When he finished the first page, he tore it off and handed it over, then started another. I took the sheet, smoothed it on my knee, and read, "Sarah." I was wrong. The shares were never about greed. The company was bleeding millions in debt, suppliers, unpaid banks circling. David's patents were our lifeline, but the board wanted to sell to Harlan. I forged the hold to buy time, told myself it was temporary. Linda saw opportunity. I looked away. "I am sorry." "Dad," the second page followed before I could speak. "Take control. Voting proxy attached. Dissolve the fraud clear." David's name turned the assets into the scholarship fund he always wanted for kids like Emily. Restore honor. Please. A legal document was clipped beneath proxy form, notarized in the hospital notary's office, granting me full authority over his remaining shares and directorship. My name typed in bold, his signature scrawled beneath, witnessed by a nurse. I stared at the pages, the weight of them heavier than any inheritance. Revenge had cracked the facade. This was the moment it could either shatter everything or rebuild it. I looked up. Dad's eyes glistened, tears tracking into the stubble along his jaw. He wrote one more line, pressed the pad into my hand, and underlined it twice. "Forgive me." The word "forgive" sat between us like a live wire. I thought of David's video, his warning about family politics, his plea to protect Emily's spirit. I thought of Linda in a holding cell, of Eleanor's whispered plot to blame me of the crayon X that had opened the safe. Forgiveness wasn't absolution. It was choice. I folded the pages, slipped them into my pocket with the first note, and took his hand. His fingers were cold, paper thin, but they squeezed back with surprising strength. "I'll do it," I said quietly. For David. For Emily. For the company he believed in. His shoulders sagged with relief, the monitor's rhythm steadying. Eleanor hovered outside the curtain, listening. I met her gaze through the gap. "We'll talk later," I told her. She nodded, uncertain pearls clicking as she swallowed. The next hours blurred into action. I called Margaret Lowe, David's attorney, and read her the proxy aloud. She arrived within the hour, briefcase in hand, eyes bright with purpose. We drafted a press release, Bennett Family Enterprises, to establish the David Bennett Memorial Scholarship Fund, fully funded by liquidated non-essential assets, overseen by an independent board. Dad signed with a trembling hand. I countersigned as proxy. By evening, the statement hit the wires. The stock, still battered, ticked upward on the news of transparency and restitution. Eleanor sat in the waiting room while lawyers conferred, twisting a tissue into knots. When I emerged, she stood. "Is it over?" she asked. I shook my head. "It's beginning." She searched my face, looking for the daughter she had dismissed, and found someone new. I was afraid, she admitted, voice small. Afraid of losing everything. I touched her arm. "We lost the lies. That's enough for now." Dad drifted in and out, the doctors cautiously optimistic. I brought Emily to see him the next afternoon. She climbed onto the bed, careful of tubes, and placed a new drawing on his chest. A stick figure grandpa holding hands with a stick figure daddy under a rainbow. "For when you wake up all the way," she whispered. Dad's good eye crinkled. A tear slipped free. I kissed his forehead, tasting salt and antiseptic, and felt the shift inside me, revenge cooling into something fiercer, legacy. On the third morning, the ventilator was removed. Dad breathed on his own, raspy but steady. Speech therapy would come later. For now, the notepad was his voice. He wrote one final message, tore the page free, and pressed it into my palm. I unfolded it in the hallway, sunlight streaming through the window like absolution. "Thank you." David would have been proud. He looked at me, tears in his eyes, and said, "Your husband would have been proud." His voice was barely a rasp, the first words he had spoken since the stroke, and they landed between us like a benediction. I squeezed his hand once more, then stepped into the corridor where Margaret Lowe waited with a thick folder and a gentle smile. The wheels of justice once set in motion rolled forward with relentless precision. March arrived raw and gray, the trial date stamped on every calendar in the county courthouse. I dressed Emily in her navy coat with the velvet collar, told her we were going to help tell the truth, and drove downtown past bare trees and slushy sidewalks. Dad was wheeled in on a gurney, still weak but lucid, flanked by attorneys in charcoal suits. Eleanor walked beside him, clutching a rosary, face carved from granite. Linda arrived in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, hair pulled back severely. Chloe stayed with a neighbor. Some truths are too heavy for 8-year-old shoulders. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old wood. Reporters filled the back rows, notebooks poised. I took the stand, first proxy papers in hand, and laid out the scholarship fund charter, every penny of liquidated assets funneled into education for children who had lost a parent. The prosecutor projected the forged documents on a screen, the post-mortem signature glowing like a neon accusation. I refused any personal restitution. "The money belongs to the future," I said, voice steady. "Not to me." The judge nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. David's name, dragged through headlines for months, emerged scrubbed clean, victim not accomplice. A collective exhale rippled through the gallery. Dad testified from a wheelchair, oxygen hissing softly. His plea deal had been negotiated in hospital corridors. Full cooperation, restitution, oversight, house arrest with electronic monitoring. He admitted the temporary hold had been desperate, not malicious, a drowning man clutching a raft. The judge accepted the deal sentence, reduced to probation and community service at the very fund he had helped create. He bowed his head when the gavel fell, tears cutting clean tracks through the stubble. Linda's trial unfolded over 3 days. Her defense painted her as a stressed executive, overworked and misled. The prosecutor countered with bank records, the love letter confession, the wire transfers to offshore accounts. The jury deliberated 97 minutes. Guilty on all counts, wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy. The sentence, 7 years, eligible for parole in 4, echoed off the paneled walls. Linda's knees buckled. Bailiffs caught her before she hit the floor. She looked at me across the aisle, eyes wild, but I met her gaze without triumph, only the hollow recognition of choices made. Outside, snow began to fall in fat, lazy flakes, the first of the season. Reporters shouted questions. I shielded Emily with my coat and kept walking. Dad was loaded into a medical van, Eleanor climbing in beside him. She reached for my hand through the open door. "Will you visit?" she asked, voice small. I nodded. "Sundays," I said. "After church." She squeezed once, then the door closed. That evening, we decorated a small tree in our own living room, just Emily and me. She hung the rainbow bracelet ornament we had made from the plastic beads now strung with silver wire. The news played muted on the television. Bennett heiress turns scandal into scholarship legacy. I turned it off. Emily sat cross-legged on the rug, stringing popcorn. "Mommy," she said, threading a kernel carefully. "Does forgiveness mean forgetting?" I knelt beside her, brushing popcorn dust from her cheek. "No, sweetheart. It means remembering without hate." She considered this, tongue between her teeth, then nodded solemnly and added another kernel to the garland. The fund launched officially the following week. Applications poured in, single parents. Foster kids dreamers with report cards clutched like golden tickets. I hired a staff, set up an office in the old carriage house behind the Victorian, and watched the first checks go out. Dad sent handwritten notes from his ankle monitor detailing board meetings he attended via Zoom. His voice stronger each time. Eleanor mailed cookies, the same recipe she had used when I was 10, now labeled with the fund's logo. Linda's appeals began almost immediately, but the evidence was ironclad. Chloe visited on weekends, quieter now, carrying drawings of her mother behind glass. I let her help stuff envelopes, taught her how to address them in careful cursive. Healing, I learned, is slow stitches, not magic. One Sunday in April, Dad greeted me at the door himself, cane in hand, the monitor blinking red on his ankle. He led me to the sunroom where the family tree drawing hung, framed above the fireplace, the red X now circled in gold. "Your mother insists," he said, voice gravelly, but warm. We drank tea from the good china, talked about interest rates and college tuition. Ordinary things that felt extraordinary. Eleanor joined us, pearls replaced by a simple silver chain, and for the first time in years, she asked about my lesson plans. Summer brought the first scholarship picnic blankets on the lawn, children chasing bubbles, parents wiping tears with paper napkins. Dad pushed a boy in a wheelchair across the grass, telling stories of the company's early days. I watched from the porch, Emily on my lap, and felt the past settle into something manageable, like a book closed but not forgotten. Fall returned with crimson leaves and the scent of wood smoke. The fund's endowment grew. David's patents, finally freed from litigation, generated steady royalties. I stood in the courthouse again this time to testify for a parole hearing, Linda's. I spoke of Chloe, of second chances, of the difference between justice and vengeance. The board granted early release with strict conditions. She would work in the fund's outreach program, mentoring the very children her choices had nearly harmed. On the drive home, Emily asked if Aunt Linda would live with us now. "No," I said, "but she'll visit. And we'll visit her." Emily nodded, satisfied, and turned on the radio to Christmas carols, though it was only November. I smiled at the familiar ache in my chest. Not pain, but memory, tempered and useful. But I wasn't done forgiving, not yet. His voice was barely a rasp, the first words he had spoken since the stroke, and they landed between us like a benediction. I squeezed his hand once more, then stepped into the corridor where Margaret Lowe waited with a thick folder and a gentle smile. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, rolled forward with relentless precision. March arrived, raw and gray, the trial date stamped on every calendar in the county courthouse. I dressed Emily in her navy coat with the velvet collar, told her we were going to help tell the truth, and drove downtown past bare trees and slushy sidewalks. Dad was wheeled in on a gurney, still weak but lucid, flanked by attorneys in charcoal suits. Eleanor walked beside him, clutching a rosary, face carved from granite. Linda arrived in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, hair pulled back severely. Chloe stayed with a neighbor. Some truths are too heavy for 8-year-old shoulders. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old wood. Reporters filled the back rows, notebooks poised. I took the stand, first proxy papers in hand, and laid out the scholarship fund charter, every penny of liquidated assets funneled into education for children who had lost a parent. The prosecutor projected the forged documents on a screen, the post-mortem signature glowing like a neon accusation. I refused any personal restitution. "The money belongs to the future," I said, voice steady. "Not to me." The judge nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. David's name, dragged through headlines for months, emerged, scrubbed clean, victim, not accomplice. A collective exhale rippled through the gallery. Dad testified from a wheelchair, oxygen hissing softly. His plea deal had been negotiated in hospital corridors, full cooperation. Restitution, oversight, house arrest with electronic monitoring. He admitted the temporary hold had been desperate, not malicious, a drowning man clutching a raft. The judge accepted the deal sentence, reduced to probation and community service at the very fund he had helped create. He bowed his head when the gavel fell, tears cutting clean tracks through the stubble. Linda's trial unfolded over 3 days. Her defense painted her as a stressed executive, overworked, and misled. The prosecutor countered with bank records, the love letter confession, the wire transfers to offshore accounts. The jury deliberated 97 minutes. Guilty on all counts, wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy. The sentence, 7 years eligible for parole in 4, echoed off the paneled walls. Linda's knees buckled. Bailiffs caught her before she hit the floor. She looked at me across the aisle, eyes wild, but I met her gaze without triumph, only the hollow recognition of choices made. Outside, snow began to fall in fat, lazy flakes, the first of the season. Reporters shouted questions. I shielded Emily with my coat and kept walking. Dad was loaded into a medical van, Eleanor climbing in beside him. She reached for my hand through the open door. "Will you visit?" she asked, voice small. I nodded. "Sundays," I said, "after church." She squeezed once, then the door closed. That evening, we decorated a small tree in our own living room, just Emily and me. She hung the rainbow bracelet ornament we had made from the plastic beads now strung with silver wire. The news played muted on the television. Bennett heiress turns scandal into scholarship legacy. I turned it off. Emily sat cross-legged on the rug, stringing popcorn. "Mommy," she said, threading a kernel carefully. "Does forgiveness mean forgetting?" I knelt beside her, brushing popcorn dust from her cheek. "No, sweetheart. It means remembering without hate." She considered this tongue between her teeth, then nodded solemnly and added another kernel to the garland. The fund launched officially the following week. Applications poured in, single parents, foster kids, dreamers with report cards clutched like golden tickets. I hired a staff, set up an office in the old carriage house behind the Victorian, and watched the first checks go out. Dad sent handwritten notes from his ankle monitor detailing board meetings he attended via Zoom. His voice stronger each time. Eleanor mailed cookies, the same recipes she had used when I was 10, now labeled with the fund's logo. Linda's appeals began almost immediately, but the evidence was ironclad. Chloe visited on weekends, quieter now, carrying drawings of her mother behind glass. I let her help stuff envelopes, taught her how to address them in careful cursive. Healing, I learned, is slow stitches, not magic. One Sunday in April, Dad greeted me at the door himself, cane in hand, the monitor blinking red on his ankle. He led me to the sunroom where the family tree drawing hung framed above the fireplace, the red X now circled in gold. "Your mother insists," he said, voice gravelly but warm. We drank tea from the good china, talked about interest rates and college tuition. Ordinary things that felt extraordinary. Eleanor joined us, pearls replaced by a simple silver chain, and for the first time in years, she asked about my lesson plans. Summer brought the first scholarship picnic blankets on the lawn, children chasing bubbles, parents wiping tears with paper napkins. Dad pushed a boy in a wheelchair across the grass, telling stories of the company's early days. I watched from the porch, Emily on my lap, and felt the past settle into something manageable, like a book closed, but not forgotten. Fall returned with crimson leaves and the scent of wood smoke. The fund's endowment grew. David's patents, finally freed from litigation, generated steady royalties. I stood in the courthouse again this time to testify for a parole hearing, Linda's. I spoke of Chloe, of second chances, of the difference between justice and vengeance. The board granted early release with strict conditions. She would work in the fund's outreach program, mentoring the very children her choices had nearly harmed. On the drive home, Emily asked if Aunt Linda would live with us now. "No," I said, "but she'll visit. And we'll visit her." Emily nodded, satisfied, and turned on the radio to Christmas carols, though it was only November. I smiled at the familiar ache in my chest. Not pain, but memory, tempered and useful. But I wasn't done forgiving, not yet. The legacy settled over the months like a quilt stitched from old and new threads, warm but never quite finished. By the following November, the David Bennett Memorial Scholarship Trust had outgrown the carriage house. I broke ground on a proper women's support center downtown, a 3-story brick building with counseling rooms, a computer lab, a play area bright with murals, and a kitchen that smelled of coffee and second chances. The fund paid for every nail and light bulb. Widows, single mothers, and women starting over walked through the doors before the paint dried. I hired Linda as outreach coordinator, parole board, approved ankle monitor traded for a lanyard, and watched her greet strangers with the same smile she once reserved for gala donors. Dad volunteered Tuesdays teaching resume workshops in a cardigan instead of a suit. Eleanor baked for every open house, her lemon bars legendary among the staff. Christmas Eve arrived crisp and quiet, the kind of cold that makes porch lights glow softer. I sent invitations on heavy cream stock dinner at the center. No gifts expected, just presents. They came, Dad leaning on his cane, Eleanor in a red wool coat. Linda in a simple green dress that hid the faint scar where the monitor had rubbed. Chloe carried a poinsettia. Emily clutched a small velvet pouch tied with ribbon. The center's common room sparkled twinkle lights strung along the beams, a tree decorated with paper cranes folded by the kids in after-school program. Tables groaned under potluck dishes. Eleanor's crown roast. Linda's garlic mashed potatoes. My own cranberry relish, tart enough to make Dad's eyes water. We ate family-style passing bowls and stories. A young mother named Rosa told how the center's emergency fund kept her lights on. Dad listened, nodding pride, softening the lines around his mouth. Linda refilled coffee. Her hands steady now. Eleanor asked about the mural in the hallway, a swirling galaxy painted by a teenage resident, and the artist Shy in an oversized sweater explained the colors represented hope. Emily tugged my sleeve throughout the meal, impatient, the pouch hidden behind her back. After dessert, chocolate Yule log dusted with powdered sugar snow. Emily stood on a chair and cleared her throat with theatrical gravity. "Grandma, this is for you." She opened the pouch and poured a bracelet into Eleanor's palm, the original plastic beads cracked and faded, restrung on silver wire, with new crystal spacers that caught the light like frost. Eleanor's breath caught. She recognized the cheap rainbow immediately. "You kept them," she whispered. Emily nodded. "Mommy said everything broken can be beautiful again." Eleanor slipped the bracelet on the beads, clicking softly against her wristbone, and pulled Emily into a hug fierce enough to lift her off the chair. Dad watched, eyes glassy, then reached for my hand across the table. "You built this," he said, voice rough. Linda raised her glass sparkling cider for her wine for the rest. To Sarah, she toasted who turned our mess into mercy. We drank the clink of glasses, a small, perfect bell. Outside, snow began to fall past the windows, silent and forgiving. Later, we gathered by the tree for carols. Residents joined voices, blending some off-key, all earnest. Chloe and Emily led Jingle Bells, shaking paper towel tube maracas. I stood between my parents, Linda on my other side, and felt the years fold into something manageable. Dad's cane tapped time. Eleanor's bracelet flashed with every gesture. When the song ended, applause rippled warm and genuine. Emily ran to hug Eleanor again, Chloe piling on, and the three of them swayed together under the lights. And just as we hugged, the voice behind us said, "I have one more gift." I turned from the embrace, Emily's curls still tickling my chin, and saw Margaret Lowe standing in the doorway to the counseling lounge, a slim silver laptop tucked under one arm and a quiet smile on her face. She had slipped in unnoticed coat dusted with snow, the same calm presence that had guided us through every legal storm. "David asked me to wait until the family was whole again," she said, voice soft enough that only those closest heard. She set the laptop on the coffee table, opened it, and pressed play before anyone could protest. The screen glowed to life, and there was David sitting in our old kitchen, the chipped table corner visible behind him, the same overhead light catching the gold in his eyes. He looked tired but resolute, the faint bruise on his cheek a shadow I now understood. "Sarah," he began, and the room fell silent, even the children sensing the weight. "If Margaret is playing this, it means you've done the hardest thing, faced the truth, and chosen what comes next. I'm proud of you. But there's one more lesson." He leaned closer, elbows on the table, the way he did when explaining fractions to Emily. "Love them even when undeserved, that's your power. Not the money, not the company, not even justice. Love that refuses to harden. That's what will outlast us all." He smiled, the crooked one that always made my knees weak. "Merry Christmas, Teach. Keep the light on." The video ended with a soft click, the screen going black. No one moved. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's cane slipped from his fingers and clattered on the hardwood. Linda's eyes filled mascara, long gone tears cutting clean paths down her cheeks. Chloe whispered Daddy, though she had never met him. Emily looked at me confused but trusting. I knelt open the velvet pouch I had carried all evening and pulled out a single bead, clear crystal faceted to catch every spark of light. The original plastic bracelet lay coiled inside, restrung and waiting. I took Eleanor's wrist, the old beads cool against my fingers, and pinned the new crystal between the faded rainbow and a fresh silver spacer. From insult to symbol, I said quietly, clicking the clasp shut. The bracelet gleamed now, cheap plastic elevated by intention, every crack a story of mending. Eleanor turned her hand, watching the light dance. "It's beautiful," she whispered and meant it. We migrated to the tall windows overlooking the courtyard, drawn by the snow that had thickened into a gentle curtain. Dad stood on my left cane, forgotten against the wall. Eleanor on my right, bracelet flashing with every breath. Linda beside her shoulders, touching for the first time in years. Chloe and Emily pressed between us noses to the glass tracing flakes with mittened fingers. The tree lights reflected in the panes, multiplying into infinity. I slipped my arms around Dad, and Eleanor felt Linda's hand find mine and spoke into the hush. This Christmas, I finally felt peace. The snow kept falling, erasing the world's sharp edges, and for a moment we were simply people under one roof, scars and all. Dad's breathing steadied beside me. Eleanor's bracelet clicked softly as she lifted Chloe higher to see. Linda squeezed my fingers once, a silent thank you. Emily giggled when a flake stuck to the window like a star. The center's residents drifted over, drawn by the quiet tableau, and someone began Silent Night in a low alto. Voices joined, tentative then sure, filling the room with harmony that needed no rehearsal. I closed my eyes. David's words settling in my chest like warm cider. Love them even when undeserved. I had burned fortunes, toppled empires, forgiven betrayals. And still the hardest part was this, standing in the light I had fought to create, and choosing to stay soft. The bead on Eleanor's wrist caught the tree glow, a tiny prism holding every color we had lost and found. Because revenge ends, but love rewrites the ending. And there we stood, 5 generations of mistakes and miracles pressed shoulder to shoulder, watching the snow rewrite the courtyard into a blank page. The final note of Silent Night faded. The room exhaled, and the only sound left was the soft click of Eleanor's bracelet every time her pulse beat. I felt David's crooked smile settle in my bones, warm and permanent. That was the night the story ended, and the living began. If this journey from a $5 insult to a $40 million legacy of love moved you, hit the subscribe button right now. And ring that bell so you never miss the next true story that proves ordinary women can rewrite extraordinary endings. Drop your favorite moment in the comments. Was it the crayon X that opened the safe, the envelope burning in the fireplace, or the crystal bead that turned trash into treasure? Tell me which scene made you cry. Cheer or text your sister. We need to talk. Your stories fuel the next one. Because revenge ends. But love rewrites the ending. See you in the next video, family. I'll save you a seat by the window.